The hum of the vending machine was the only sound in the small, dimly lit break room. It was just past midnight, the time when the world outside slept. But inside the 24-hour retail store, life carried on in its slow, weary rhythm. The smell of cheap coffee lingered in the air, and the fluorescent lights overhead flickered faintly, casting shadows that made the space feel colder than it really was. Emma sat on the worn wooden bench, her head bowed low, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a simple lunchbox. She didn't touch the food. Her blonde hair, tied back in a messy bun, hid most of her face, but the slight quiver of her shoulders gave her away. She was crying quietly, trying so desperately not to be heard. She hadn't been working at this store long, barely 2 weeks. Hired as a cashier out of desperation, she had taken the night shift because it paid a little more, though not nearly enough to cover everything she needed. Life had cornered her, and this job, no matter how exhausting, was the only thing standing between her and losing everything. But tonight, something inside her had finally cracked. Maybe it was the rude customer who tossed a crumpled $5 bill at her face earlier. Maybe it was the pile of bills sitting on her kitchen counter, unopened because she couldn't bring herself to face the numbers inside. Or maybe it was the fact that her little brother had texted her earlier, asking if she could help pay for his school trip, and she'd had to type out the hardest word she knew no. She buried her face in her hands and whispered through clenched teeth, "I can't do this anymore. I just can't." What she didn't know was that someone had been watching her from the doorway. Derek Hayes stood there silently, his sharp eyes fixed on her, his tall frame almost blending into the shadows of the hall. To anyone else, he looked like an ordinary customer or maybe a businessman stopping by after hours. The tailored navy suit, the polished shoes, the expensive watch on his wrist, all of it hinted at someone far removed from this world of fluorescent lights and vending machines. But Derek wasn't just a businessman. He was the businessman, the owner and CEO of Hayes Mart, the very chain of retail stores Emma had just started working for. Of course, no one here knew that. Not tonight. He'd come undercover, something he did every year, slipping into one of his stores dressed as a regular manager in training to see how things really ran when the suits weren't looking. To the staff, he was just Derek, the new trainee learning the ropes. To Emma, he was a stranger, someone she hadn't even spoken to yet. But now, watching her in the break room, Derek felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time: concern, anger, and a deep, unshakable ache. He had built this company from the ground up. He knew every profit margin, every shareholder's demand, every polished number his executives presented in glossy reports. But seeing this one of his own employees, alone and breaking under the weight of a life she clearly couldn't carry, shattered something in him. For years, Derek had convinced himself that he was doing good by keeping the company alive, by expanding, by providing jobs. But now, standing in the cold glow of the break room, he realized how easy it was to forget the faces behind those jobs. He stepped forward. Emma flinched when she heard the faint click of his shoes on the tile floor. She quickly wiped her face and straightened, forcing a tight, fake smile as she looked up. "Sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. I'll be out in a minute. I just needed a break." Derek hesitated, softening his voice. "It's okay. You don't need to apologize." She looked at him properly for the first time, noticing the expensive cut of his suit, the calm steadiness in his eyes. He didn't seem like the other managers she'd met, none of the fake smiles or condescending tones. There was something different about him, though she couldn't quite place it. "You new here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Just training. Learning the ropes." He paused, then, as gently as he could, added, "Rough night?" Emma let out a weak, bitter laugh. "Every night's rough when you're living paycheck to paycheck." She bit her lip, as if she regretted saying so much, then shook her head. "Sorry, you don't need to hear about my problems." But Derek stayed silent, giving her the space to continue. There was something in his eyes, genuine interest, maybe even understanding, that made her want to keep talking. And maybe, just, for once, she needed someone to listen. She stared down at the untouched food in her hands. I don't know how much longer I can do this. My mom's sick, my brother's still in high school, and every cent I make disappears before I can even breathe. Rent, meds, bills. I can't even remember the last time I bought something just for me. Her voice broke on the last word, and Derek felt his chest tighten. He had heard countless business pitches, corporate sob stories, and pleas for funding over the years. But this was different. This wasn't someone asking for millions. This was someone who simply wanted to survive, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, it shattered his heart. Before he could stop himself, he said softly, "What if things didn't have to be this way?" Emma blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Derek hesitated. He couldn't reveal who he was not yet. But he knew, in that moment, that he wasn't just going to walk away and leave her like this. "I mean," he said carefully, "sometimes life throws us into the worst places so we can find something or someone that changes everything. You might not see it yet, but this isn't the end of your story." Emma looked at him, her tear-streaked face softening. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, someone had spoken to her like she wasn't invisible. Like she was more than just another cog in a machine. And though she didn't know who this man really was, or how deeply those words were going to change her life, she felt, just for a moment, like she could breathe again. For the next few nights, Derek found himself watching Emma more closely than he had ever intended. He told himself it was because he needed to understand his employees better, what they endured, what they faced when no one was there to protect them. But the truth was, there was something about Emma that pulled at him in a way he couldn't quite define. She carried herself like someone used to disappointment, yet somehow, she still moved through her shifts with a quiet determination, never once lashing out or complaining. Even when customers treated her like she was invisible, most people didn't notice her. Derek did. He started spending his breaks in the same room as her, never pushing, just being there. Some nights, she would stay silent, eating her small homemade meals while scrolling through her cracked phone screen. Other nights, she would open up, her voice soft and hesitant as if speaking her worries. Aloud might make them heavier. He learned that her mother had been diagnosed with a chronic illness 2 years ago, leaving Emma to juggle 2 part-time jobs while caring for her at home. Her father had left when she was 12, and since then, Emma had been the one keeping what was left of her family afloat. Her paycheck barely covered rent for their tiny apartment, and most weeks she skipped meals, so her younger brother could eat properly before school. She never said this with self-pity, she said it like it was just a fact of life, the way things were. Derek, who had grown up with nothing himself, felt a familiar pang in his chest as she spoke. He remembered his own nights sleeping in a car, his days working double shifts just to buy a single decent meal. But back then, no one had looked out for him. He'd clawed his way up alone, and now, standing in this break room with Emma, he realized he didn't want her to go through that same brutal climb. One night, after a particularly grueling shift, where a customer had yelled at Emma for something she hadn't even done, Derek found her sitting in the break room again. This time, she wasn't crying, but her shoulders were slumped in defeat. He sat beside her, his voice calm. "Why do you stay?" She blinked, glancing at him. "At this job?" He nodded at Emma sighed, staring at the scuffed floor. "Because I can't afford to leave. No one's hiring full-time. Everyone wants you to work part-time so they don't have to give you benefits, and I can't risk losing what little I have." I don't have anyone else. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had heard employees complain before, but Emma wasn't complaining. She was surviving. Derek's jaw tightened. For years, his executives had justified cutting costs and benefits, claiming it was industry standard and necessary for growth. But sitting here, next to Emma, those excuses felt hollow. What good was growth if it came at the expense of people like her? Emma, he said quietly, if you could, I don't know. Start over? Do something else, what would you do? She looked at him, surprised. Start over? That's not really an option for people like me. Humor me, he pressed gently. She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her lunchbox. Finally, she murmured, I used to draw, design things. When I was younger, I wanted to be a graphic designer. But college was never an option, not with our bills. Dreams don't keep the lights on. Derek studied her for a moment, filing that away in his mind. He didn't say anything then, but later that night, as he drove home in his sleek black car, past neighborhoods where people like Emma could never afford to live, he made a decision. For years, he had let his company run like every other corporate giant focused on numbers, profit margins, and efficiency. But maybe it was time to start doing things differently. Maybe it was time to actually see the people who worked for him. The very next day, Derek began making calls, quietly, without drawing attention to himself. He contacted the regional manager, posing as just another trainee who had noticed some issues. He asked for data pay scales, scheduling policies, benefits. The numbers infuriated him. Emma wasn't just unlucky, she was caught in a system his own company had created, a system that kept workers on the edge while executives reaped the rewards. Derek had the power to change it, but he wasn't going to do it with a press release or a flashy announcement. No, this was personal. He wanted to make sure Emma specifically got the help she needed, even if she never knew where it came from. The next week, things began to shift for her. Her schedule, which had been filled with grueling back-to-back closing shifts, suddenly changed. She was given better hours, ones that allowed her to actually rest. Her paycheck, inexplicably, came with a slight raise labeled as a new company incentive program. A care package showed up at her door one evening, a basket filled with groceries, basic necessities, and a prepaid card to help with her mother's medications. There was no note. Emma was confused, overwhelmed, but quietly grateful. She didn't know why things were changing, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe she could breathe. Derek never said a word about it to her. He still showed up for his shifts, still sat with her on breaks, still listened when she needed to talk. But there was something different in the way he looked at her, now a quiet resolve, as if he'd made it his mission to make sure she didn't fall through the cracks. One evening, as they sat in the break room eating their lunches, Emma glanced at him curiously. You know, for a trainee, you don't seem like the kind of guy who needs this job. What's your story, really? Derek smirked faintly, deflecting. Let's just say, I've been on both sides of the counter. I know what it's like to start at the bottom. Emma tilted her head, intrigued but too tired to press further. She simply nodded and went back to her meal. But Derek knew it wouldn't be long before his true identity came out. And when it did, he wasn't sure how she would react. What he did know, however, was this: the changes in Emma's life didn't go unnoticed for long, and not so by her coworkers. And certainly not by Emma herself. At first, she thought it was just coincidence. The schedule adjustments, the unexpected raise, the prepaid card that arrived with no sender's name. Life had been cruel for so long that she didn't dare believe someone might actually be helping her. But then the whispers began. On a late Thursday night, as Emma stocked shelves during a slow hour, she overheard two coworkers murmuring near the registers. Did you hear? The regional manager's been poking around lately. Apparently, corporate's taking a sudden interest in our store. People are saying someone high up is watching. Yeah, the other replied. I heard they're testing some employee support thing, but it's only happening here. Weird, right? Why us? Emma kept her head down, pretending not to hear, but her heart thudded. Things didn't just change in places like this, not without reason. And she couldn't shake the feeling that somehow it all tied back to Derek, the quiet, composed trainee who seemed too polished, too observant, to just be learning the ropes. That suspicion grew stronger the next night, when she walked into the break room and found Derek there, not sitting idly, but reviewing what looked like employee files. He quickly closed the folder when she entered, his expression unreadable. Hey, rough shift? He asked casually, as if nothing were unusual. Emma hesitated, eyeing the folder. What are you doing with those? Trainees don't deal with paperwork like that. Derek met her gaze, calm but firm. Just helping out. Management asked me to review some things. Emma frowned. Management trusts you with that already? You've been here what, a couple of weeks? There was a tension in the room she hadn't felt before. Derek didn't answer immediately, and for a moment, the humming of the vending machine was the only sound. Then, he said quietly, sometimes people wear a role so they can understand the people they're working with better. That's all. It wasn't an answer. And Emma knew it. But she didn't push not yet. She couldn't afford to lose the kadavat to lose the mas. Only person who seemed to care, even if he was hiding something. The truth started to unravel a few days later, when a customer stormed into the store, shouting about a refund for an expensive appliance. Emma, stationed at the register, did her best to handle it, but the man grew louder and angrier, throwing accusations at her like knives. Derek appeared seemingly out of nowhere, calm, commanding. He didn't raise his voice, but the way he spoke, the authority in it wasn't something any trainee would have. Within minutes, the customer was pacified, refunded, and escorted out by security, leaving Emma staring at Derek in shock. You're not just a trainee, are you? She whispered when they were alone. Derek looked at her for a long moment. His jaw tight, then exhaled slowly. No, I'm not. Emma crossed her arms, her chest tightening. Then who are you? Why are you here? What do you want from me? Her voice wavered, not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. She couldn't handle another lie, another person pretending to care only to vanish. Derek didn't move closer, but his voice softened. I didn't come here to hurt you, Emma. I came here because I needed to see my company from the ground level, to remember what it's like for the people who make it run. Emma blinked, the words not quite sinking in. Your company? He nodded. I'm Derek Hayes, CEO of Hayesmart. The silence in the break room was deafening. Emma stared at him, her mind scrambling to piece together the last 2 weeks, the suit, the strange favors, the mysterious support. It all made sense now, and yet it felt unreal, like she was standing in the middle of some elaborate prank. She took a step back. So, what? You've just been spying on us? Playing undercover boss while we scrape by, just so you can feel better about yourself? Derek flinched at her tone. It's not like that. I wanted to see the truth, and I did. His voice grew firmer. You and people like you are the reason this company even exists. And yet, you're treated like you're expendable. That's on me. I won't let it stay that way. Emma's anger wavered, replaced by a flood of conflicting emotions. She didn't know whether to be furious, relieved, or grateful. So what? Now? You fix everything and ride off in your fancy car, and I'm just supposed to trust you? Derek looked at her, his expression softer now. No, I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to let me prove that things can be different. For you, for everyone here." Emma wanted to believe him, desperately, but life had taught her not to trust promises, especially from people with power. And yet, when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see the arrogance she expected from a CEO. She saw something else entirely: determination, regret, and maybe, just maybe, something personal, a reason he cared that went beyond business. Before she could respond, the store intercom crackled to life, pulling them both back into the night's routine. But as Derek turned to leave, he glanced back at her. "I'm not going anywhere, Emma. Not until I make this right." And for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she thought she'd lost long ago. Hope. The next few days felt like a storm brewing beneath the calm surface of the store. The employees didn't know the full truth yet, but they knew something big was happening. Schedules were being adjusted to give everyone more balanced hours. Overtime pay was suddenly being approved without hassle. And whispers began circulating about a new benefits package in testing that promised health coverage even for part-time employees, something unheard of in retail. Emma couldn't ignore it anymore. She had confronted Derek, and now she knew exactly who he was. But knowing didn't make it easier to make sense of him. CEOs weren't supposed to sit on hard benches in dingy break rooms, eating reheated pasta while listening to a cashier talk about overdue rent. They weren't supposed to care, not like this. And yet, every night, Derek still found his way into the break room at some point during their overlapping shifts. He didn't flaunt his position, didn't talk about money or power. Instead, he listened. Really listened. One night, as Emma sat across from him, she finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her. "Why me?" Her voice was steady, but her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "You run a company with thousands of employees. Why single me out?" Derek leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable at first. Then his gaze softened. "Because you reminded me of me. Before all this." Emma tilted her head, uncertain. If he was serious, you were never like this. "Not really." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "You'd be surprised. I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment with a leaky roof and a father who disappeared when I was 15. I worked construction, washed dishes, slept in my car for a while when things got bad. No one handed me a lifeline. I had to build everything from scratch." He paused, his voice quieter now. "But somewhere along the way I stopped looking back. I got so focused on running the company, on keeping investors happy, that I forgot there were still people out there living the way I used. Tio. People like you." Emma stared at him, processing his words. For the first time, she saw past the expensive watch, the suit, the perfectly calm exterior. Beneath it all, Derek Hayes wasn't just some untouchable CEO. He was someone who understood exactly what it felt like to be drowning. "And now?" she asked softly. "And now," Derek said firmly, "I'm going to make sure no one in this company feels invisible again. Starting with you." Emma wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need charity. But she didn't, because deep down, she knew this wasn't just about her. He meant everyone who had been grinding themselves down for pennies while executives thrived. Still, she couldn't help but ask, what happens when you leave? When the cameras come in, or the board pushes back? Will all this vanish? Derek met her eyes, his expression steady. "Not if I make it permanent, and not if you help me." "Me?" she echoed, startled. He nodded. "You see things I can't. You hear things no report will tell me. If I'm going to fix this, I need someone I can trust on the ground. Someone who knows what it's like to be on the receiving end of all these policies. Someone honest enough to tell me when we're still getting it wrong." Emma's chest tightened. She'd never been asked to be part of anything like this. Most days, she felt like she barely mattered at all, just another face behind a counter, replaceable and overlooked. And now, here was Derek Hayes, offering her a seat at a table she never thought she'd see, let alone be invited to. "I don't know," she murmured. "I'm just a cashier." "You're not just anything," Derek said, his voice low but firm. "You're the reason I'm doing this. And if you'll let me, I'll make sure you're never just anything again." The room was quiet for a long moment. The hum of the vending machine, the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights, and the distant sounds of customers moving through the store were the only noises. Finally, Emma whispered, "Okay, I'll help." Derek's lips curved into the faintest smile, not smug, not victorious, but relieved. "Good. We'll start small, quietly. But soon, everyone here will feel the difference." Over the next 2 weeks, Derek worked quietly but relentlessly. And Emma found herself pulled into a world she never imagined. She attended closed-door meetings after her shifts, sitting beside Derek while regional managers and HR representatives listened to her describe the real struggles employees faced, the skipped meals, the impossible schedules, the constant fear of losing hours. At first, they looked at her like she didn't belong, but Derek shut down every whisper of doubt with a single look. By the end of the second week, word began spreading that Hayesmart was rolling out a pilot program across select stores. This one included higher base pay, guaranteed benefits for employees working over 20 hours a week, mental health support. For Emma, it felt surreal. Not just because of the changes, but because Derek insisted she be there to witness every decision, to make sure it wasn't just a publicity stunt, but amid all the work, something else was happening, something neither of them wanted to admit outright. Some nights, after the meetings ended, they'd linger in the break room, not talking about policies or benefits, but about life. About her brother's dream of becoming a teacher. About Derek's first years building his company, sleeping under his desk because he couldn't afford an office and an apartment. One night, as the store lights dimmed for closing, Emma found herself laughing at a story Derek told about accidentally breaking a register his first week as a team cashier. It was the first time she had genuinely laughed in months. When the laughter faded, they just sat there, the silence between them heavy but not uncomfortable. And in that quiet, Emma realized something she hadn't before. Derek wasn't just here to fix the company. He was here because, for the first time in years, he'd found something worth slowing down for. Someone who reminded him of where he came from and maybe where he wanted to go. She wasn't sure what that meant yet. But she knew one thing. Her life was no longer heading down the same bleak path it had been. And Derek Hayes was the reason why. With every new benefit rolled out and every silent injustice corrected, Hayesmart's overnight transformation began to ripple far beyond the little store where Emma worked. But not everyone welcomed the change. Some of the senior employees, those who had worked quietly, waited patiently, and accepted the old system, began whispering behind Emma's back. They didn't like that a cashier, barely 3 weeks into the job, suddenly had the CEO's ear. They didn't see the struggle behind her eyes. They didn't know the nights she went without food or the mornings she walked miles just to get to work. They only saw what looked like favoritism. She's just lucky he noticed her. Probably flirting her way to a promotion. But she's not even that poor, probably putting on a show. The comments slithered through the aisles like smoke. And though Emma tried to ignore them, they clung to her tight and suffocating. She never asked for any of this. One evening, as Emma stood near the back room, organizing return stock, she overheard two coworkers, Melissa and Jared, talking in hushed but unmistakably cruel tones. "I don't care what she says," Melissa whispered. "Normal people don't just get discovered by CEOs. She's playing him. Watch, she'll be assistant manager by next week." Jared scoffed, if she's lucky. I wouldn't be surprised if she's already something more personal to him. Emma's face flushed with a wave of shame and fury she hadn't expected. Her throat tightened. She turned quickly before they noticed her, gripping the shelf to steady herself. Later that night, she sat in the break room alone, her meal untouched in front of her. The warm, grateful place that had become her little haven now felt heavy-tainted. She didn't hear Derek walk in until he quietly pulled out the chair across from her. "Emma?" His voice was gentle, but one look at her expression made him pause. "What happened?" She looked up slowly, her eyes darker than he'd seen them before. "They think I'm using you. That I'm getting special treatment. That I'm doing things for favors." Derek's eyes flared with protective anger. "Who said that?" "It doesn't matter," she murmured. "They'll never see me as someone who earned this." Just the girl who cried in the break room and caught the CEO's attention. Derek leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "Emma, you didn't catch my attention by crying. You caught it by surviving when no one else would have held on. By showing up night after night, even when everything inside you was breaking. You didn't ask for any of this. I came to you." Emma blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. "It doesn't change what they think." "No," he said, "but it changes what I think, and what the company will become because of you." She stared at him, her lips parting in disbelief. "You're willing to take all this heat? For me?" Derek met her eyes, something unspoken burning just beneath the surface. "Emma, I'd take 1,000 rumors if it meant you never had to feel powerless again." That night, Derek made another decision. One that would no longer keep things in the shadows. The following week, Haysmart announced an internal restructuring, with a memo sent out chain-wide. A new employee advocacy division would be formed, tasked with gathering real, frontline feedback from workers across the country to help reshape company policy, and heading the first pilot chapter. Emma Clarke, cashier turned employee advisor to the CEO. There was no hiding it now. The media picked it up. Local news outlets ran headlines like, "Undercover CEO Finds Hidden Hero in Local Store." From register to boardroom, the story of a cashier who changed a company. Jealousy turned to stunned silence. The co-workers who had mocked her now averted their eyes. Managers who once waved her off now greeted her with nervous smiles. And yet, Emma remained the same. She still took the bus to work. Still helped clean up spills on aisle 5. Still took her breaks in the same small room with the vending machines. But the company had changed because she had. Still, the biggest change wasn't printed in any memo. It was in the subtle moments between her and Derek that said, more than any headline could. Late one evening, after a company event celebrating the program's success, Emma and Derek stood on the rooftop of the building, watching the city lights sparkle in the distance. She turned to him, arms folded to fight the wind. "You know, I never asked, why didn't you stop all this sooner? You've been CEO for years." Derek exhaled slowly, the question hitting deeper than she meant it to. "Because I forgot. I forgot where I came from. I got so caught up building the empire, I stopped looking at the ground beneath it." He looked at her, his expression soft. "Then I met you. And you reminded me." Emma held his gaze. "And now?" "Now," Derek said, stepping a little closer, "I see it all again. The people, the fight, the worth in every story I once ignored." There was a long pause between them, quiet, thick with unsaid things. Emma lowered her gaze, heart pounding. "They still talk, you know, about you and me." "I don't care," he said simply. "Let them talk." She looked up again, this time with a smile that held strength. "Neither do I." And in the space between them, something finally broke. Free not from pain, but from possibility. Not because she needed rescuing, but because someone had finally seen her not as a problem to fix, but as a force to believe in. It didn't take long for the board of Haysmart to notice the changes Derek was making. At first, they were quiet, assuming the pilot programs and new employee advocacy roles were just temporary experiments to boost public relations. But as weeks passed, and as Emma's name started appearing in internal reports and media stories, their patience wore thin. On a rainy Tuesday evening, Derek received a call to appear before the board in the downtown headquarters. Emma, sitting in his office as he hung up, caught the storm in his expression. "They're not happy," Derek said, rubbing the back of his neck. "They think you're a distraction. That these changes are draining resources. They want the programs cut, and they want you out of the company." Emma froze, her chest tightening. "Of course they do. I told you this would happen. I don't belong in boardrooms, Derek. I was never supposed to be anything more than a cashier." Derek turned sharply to her, his voice low but firm. "Emma, don't ever say that again. You do belong here. If anyone doesn't, it's the ones who think profit matters more than people." But Emma could see the weight on his shoulders. The fight he was about to walk into wouldn't be easy. "If they make you choose," she said softly, "choose the company. Don't throw everything away for me. I'll be fine." Derek stepped closer, his eyes steady on hers. "Emma, you are the company, or at least what it should be. If I have to choose, I already know my answer." The board meeting was brutal. 12 executives, all older, all hardened by years of running the company like a machine, sat around the long glass table. Rain streaked the windows behind them as Derek stood at the head of the room, his presence unshaken despite the tension. One of the senior board members, a sharp-eyed man named Calloway, spoke first. "Derek, we agreed on expansion this quarter, not charity. These pay raises, these benefits, these advocacy programs, none of them were in the budget. Investors are already asking questions." Another board member leaned forward. "And this cashier, Emma Clarke. Why is she suddenly in meetings with our executives? She's not qualified. It's unprofessional. The optics are questionable, to say the least." Derek's jaw tightened. Emma Clarke is the reason Haysmart is about to avoid a public relations nightmare. She represents every worker we've ignored for the sake of margins. She's not a liability, she's a reminder of why this company exists in the first place. Calloway scoffed. "Save the speech. We all know why she's here. Whatever relationship you have with her, it's clouding your judgment. End it, or step down." The room went silent. Derek's hands clenched at his sides, but his voice, when he spoke, was calm and unwavering. "You're right about one thing. I do have a relationship with her, not the kind you're insinuating. A relationship built on honesty, on seeing the truth of what this company has become and what it needs to be to survive." He took a step closer to the table, his gaze sweeping across the room. "If you think I'll abandon her or the thousands of workers like her to keep you comfortable, you're mistaken. I started this company in a garage with $50 to my name. I don't answer to greed. I answer to the people who built Haysmart with their sweat and time while you collected bonuses." His voice grew sharper. "So here's my decision. The programs stay, Emma stays. And if that means I step down as CEO, so be it. But you'll be the ones explaining to the world why you fired the man trying to fix your reputation while every news outlet is praising him for it." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Calloway opened his mouth, but no words came out. Derek turned toward the door. "Meeting adjourned. I have a company to run." When Derek returned to his office, Emma was standing by the window, her hands clasped nervously. The tension on his face eased as soon as he saw her. "Well?" she asked quietly. He closed the distance between them. The programs are staying. You're staying. And if they want me gone, they'll have to drag me out. Emma exhaled, her eyes shining not with fear, but something else. You didn't have to fight like that. Not for me. Derek's gaze softened, his voice dropping lower. Emma, it was never just for you. It was for every person breaking their back to survive. But yes, you're the reason I remembered. Why I started this company. You're the reason I care again. The silence between them was thick, filled with words neither had dared to speak. Until now. Emma took a tentative step closer. So, what happens now? To us? Derek searched. Her eyes, then answered, his voice steady but warm. Now, I stop pretending this is just about business. For a moment, the rain outside and the hum of the city below faded away. The CEO and the cashier, no longer bound by titles, simply stood there, two people who had pulled each other back from the edge in ways neither had expected, and for the first time in years, both of them felt something they thought they'd lost forever: a future. Together. The following week, Haysmart officially launched the Employee Advocacy Division, nationwide, with Emma Clarke as its first director. Her name became a symbol not just within the company, but in the industry, proof that one voice, when heard, could change everything. And while the headlines would focus on corporate reform, profit margins, and the surprising partnership between a CEO and a former cashier, the real story wasn't about policies or publicity. It was about two people who, in a world of endless noise, had found something far rarer than success. They had found each other.